Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm excited for the second part of the David and Goliath series. I would say personally that this is basically my favorite part as we're coming to the crux of our presentation. And previously, right, we looked at the story between the ancient hatred between Israel and the Philistines, and we find out that the Philistines were not just soothsayers and divination, but the Philistines were also scoffers and scorners. And so we're going to find out how Goliath is actually doing exactly that same thing. But as we're coming now very closely to the crux of the story, we start our story and we look at the spiritual aspect of the story, right? And now, still the David and Goliath. Now, if you remember the story with Moses and the angel of the Lord, and you find out that Moses needed to take off his sandals because the place that he is standing was holy, and that the angel that was of the Lord, that was the David.Very. From our previous presentation, we showed you that that is actually related to Jesus Christ, our Mashiach. Now, not just Moses needed to take off these shoes because the place that he was standing was holy, but we hear in the story of Joshua, the book of Joshua, that Joshua had a similar encounter. That Joshua also, he met a man, and Joshua asked this guy, are you for us or against us? And it is interesting what the man told Joshua, right? And the man told Joshua that Joshua also need to take off his sandals because the place where he's standing was also holy ground. And it is interesting, very interesting that this man calls Joshua, that he is basically the captain of the armies of God. What? That's interesting. He calls himself the captain of the armies of God. The captain of the armies of God. Well, if you remember, the Lord of the host, the Adonai Tzavot, the Lord of the host, who is the captain of the armies of God, which is more a military term, right? A military term. But we know that the Jehovah of the armies, or the Lord of the host, you understand, as the prophet who actually saw that. And remember, the prophet was walking along, the prophet Elijah. Elijah was walking with his servant, and they saw multitude of the armies coming against Israel. And this guy was shouting and said, my Lord, look at the vast army. And the prophet told him, but those who are with us, right, are more than them. And the guy was talking to Elisha like, did you lose your marbles? Like, there is nobody there, it's only the armies. And Elisha prayed and he said, Lord, open up the servant's eye. And what did the servant see? He saw the Jehovah of the armies. He saw the captain of the armies of God. He saw the armies of God that will fight on behalf, you understand, of Israel. So this is what he see. This is what Joshua saw. Do you understand? When Joshua saw the captain of the armies of God, actually a divine figure, right? It was a divine figure that fights with the armies of God. And we're making such a big fuss about this divine figure that fights with the armies of God. And then you remember the Jacob story as well. Interesting. That Jacob had an encounter, right? Jacob was wrestling with the angel of the Lord. And I remember that the prophet Hosea, if you look at Hosea, or Hosea, he says something interesting. He says, Jacob as a man, he wrestled with God. And I remember that when Jacob wrestled with him, Jacob's name was changed. Jacob's name was changed. Jacob's name was changed. They gave him the name Israel, because the guy actually, he wrestled with God. And I remember Jacob called the place Peniel. Peniel. Why Peniel? From Panim. You understand? Because Jacob says he saw the face of God. Jacob saw the face of God. Genesis chapter 32 verse 30. Jacob saw the Lord face to face. And I love what they are saying. There was no prophet like Moses who saw God face to face. And here this man is face to face, and that's why he called that place Peniel. And then I read an interesting story. I think it was either in the book of Jubilee and in the book of Enoch. And in the book of Enoch, they mentioned an angel called Phanuel. And I was like, who the hell is Phanuel? You're going to find out that this Phanuel, you understand, as his name says, the angel that has the face of God. The angel like the Sarapanim, the angel that carries the presence of God. Isn't that interesting? The angel of his presence. But isn't he the Lord of the host? Isn't he the one that Joshua actually saw? The captain of the armies of God. Isn't he the one that Moses encountered at the burning bush? The angel of the Lord. The angel of the Lord that carries the presence of God. The angel, the captain of his armies. But now, the captain of the armies, Revelation talks something interesting. There is somebody on that. There is a captain in Revelation chapter 21 that goes with the armies of God, that is on white horses. On his train of his robe, there is a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And we know who is the King of Kings and who is the Lord of Lords. We know that it's nothing but the Mashiach. That's the Lord Jesus Christ that will come in the Gog and Magog type of end times prophecy and will come and fight. Do you understand? With the armies of God. He leads the armies of God. We know who he is. We know that is Yeshua. That's the Lord Jesus Christ. But we know who is the Adonai Tzavod, who is the Lord of the host. He is the captain of the armies of God. He is the captain of the armies of God. Isn't that interesting? The captain of the armies of God that Elisha is actually talking about. Now, why do we make such a big fuss? Because if you go and look at the king, the Melech, who is a representative of David.Very, because you can see David.Very is 26, and the king is 3 times that. And the king has dominion. So when you look at Adam, who had dominion over the entire reign that God, the creation that God gave into his name, Adam. And we can know who's the second Adam as well. Very interesting. But then we found out what happened in the garden. What happened in the garden? We find out that it is the snake that basically had this slander, had this evil speech. This is what the snake had. The snake was the one with the evil that accuses, right? Told Adam and Eve, you understand, about that God gave them authority to eat from the tree of good and evil. And we know that the snake actually, that represents the evil inclination, the Yetzirah, was basically speaking evil. And notice what was. Very important. Notice what was the curse, that he shall eat dust. That's an interesting thing. He shall eat dust. But the curse that came upon him is that an enmity will come between the woman and the serpent's seed. And that man that will come from the woman, he will basically crush in the head. Similar, Psalm 110. The Lord will make your enemies a footstool. Similar, Jeremiah is saying the same thing, that God will crush their heads. Similar, the Psalm is saying, you understand, that the Leviathan will be crushed. His head will be crushed. Similar, Psalm 91, that you will tread upon the lion and tread upon the cobra, and you shall tread upon the young lion and tread upon the serpent. Similar languages are being used. Can you see that? And so, if you go and look at Goliath and you basically investigate the ancient hatred towards Ami Israel, you will find out that Goliath is actually a descendant of the nephilim. What? Exactly. Goliath is a descendant of the nephilim. And if you look at the nephilim, right, from the story of Genesis chapter 6, right, and you will see they produce heroes, they produce these giants that were basically called the Anakites. And Goliath had even brothers. They were 5 of them, right? And that's why I love, if you read the story of Samuel chapter 17, they use an interesting word there when they discuss Goliath. And I love that word that they say he was a Benjamin. And that's interesting. That means between that Goliath was actually built like a house, like built, like very huge. But he was in between. I like that, in between his brothers. So that's an interesting statement that he made. And if you go back to the TED Talk, while we made this David and Goliath story, and the guy said in the TED Talk that Goliath was 2 point something meters. Even if Goliath was 3 meters, it is not basically, you understand, comparing to the spy's description. Remember what the spy said, how big the giants was, right? And if you look at the measurement and the SI unit from the spies, the Anakites, the spy said that we are like grasshoppers in their eyes. What? Exactly. So they were big. Can you see that? And they were so big that if you look at even a bunch of grapes were basically being carried, right? They would carry a bunch of grapes on their shoulders. That's basically how big the giants were. Like we were grasshoppers in their sight. So it means, excuse me, that the giants can't be 2 meters. Otherwise, Shaul can take that guy on, because that's the meaning of the name of the king of Israel, Shaul. Right? Shaul was head above, you understand, the rest of Army Israel. So Shaul was also almost 2 meters. So why didn't Shaul take the guy on? Unless Goliath was a real giant, because the Bible says he strike fear. What? Yes, Goliath strike fear. When Goliath was coming, he basically strike fear in Army Israel. And you can actually see that Goliath, you understand, if you look at it, he would come for 40 days. 40 days. But didn't Moses go up into Mount Sinai and spend 40 days to go and get the Torah? So why is he basically taunting and taking 40 days? Because remember the Pharisees, the Philistines, the scorners and scoffers that they are. And this man was taunting the armies and defying the armies for 40 days. He was taunting them. Do you understand? But why 40 days? And I read something interesting in the Talmud where the rabbis are saying that Goliath was actually, I don't know if that is true, that Goliath was actually the son of Orpah. Orpah. Now you remember Orpah's sister Ruth, and that Ruth cling onto Naomi, and Orpah basically left. And they are saying that the 40 steps that Orpah walked with Naomi is dedicated to the 40 days that Goliath taunted the army. But the timing of Goliath, if you look at it from a spiritual perspective, was very interesting. What was so interesting? Why did Goliath only came in the morning and in the evening? Because he came in the morning and the evening, perfect timing. Spiritual battle. It was a spiritual battle, because that's the time of evening sacrifice. That's the time of the daily sacrifice, the morning sacrifice. That's the time that Army Israel will basically do their prayer with Shema Israel Adonai. That's when the Kazans will basically come and they will basically shout for Army Israel to start praying. Listen, hear the voice of the word of Israel. The Lord thy God is one. They would pray in the morning. So Goliath would disturb the prayer. It was a spiritual thing. Can you see that? And Goliath was taunting them. But if you go and zoom in 1 Samuel chapter 17, Goliath must have been a giant. Why? Because you know that the Anakites, they were basically in grasshoppers in their sight, and that a bunch of grapes that you basically can just eat like this, it was basically carried on the shoulders. That's what the spies were telling us. And that shows us that Goliath can't be 2 meters. Because they say Goliath struck fear. He struck fear in Army Israel, and everybody feared him. Because he can't be 2 meters. Otherwise Shaul would take him. Because Shaul was that length. And so if they were struck with fear, then Goliath must have been a real giant. Does it make sense? And you know, in the garden, because Goliath is basically an Anakite, and we know what the serpent did. He spoke evil, and they told him that he will eat dust. And you know what happened with Goliath. Goliath also spoke evil. He spoke evil. And we know what happened to Goliath. He also ate dust. Do you understand? And let's just zoom in and see how did it come that Goliath basically ate dust. Right. Number one, something interesting. They talk about the armor of Goliath. The armor. Now remember, Israel is in the Bronze Age. And you know that the Philistines, because they suffer from this superiority complex, because they were in the Iron Age, because their weapons was like technologically advanced, and that's why they were taunting, and that's why they were scoffing and scorning, because that's what the Philistines were known. Can you see that? But they tell you that Goliath had a bronze helmet. Interesting. That there were scales. Scales. I mean, this sounds more like the snake. There were scales and there were bronze. And you look at the snake is the Nachash, but the bronze is the Nechoshet. So that's interesting. Bronze related to it's the Nechoshet. So is Goliath related to that snake? Because remember that ancient hatred they have for Israel. Do you understand? That comes from the garden. So Goliath was also Nephilim. So Goliath is half human and half demonic. So that is interesting how Goliath will basically get his downfall. Can you see that? And if you look at the sword, man, even the spear was like heavy. Do you understand? The spear was heavy, the sword was heavy, the armor was heavy. And now, when you go and look at the fight that was suggested between them, it was suggested that they would go on the one-on-one combat. Right? It would basically save the entire army. So, the Philistines will pick their champion Goliath. Right? They pick their champion Goliath. Right? And then Israel will basically pick their fighter. And the one-on-one combat, the fighter that will basically win. Right? The loser who needs to succumb to the demands, you understand, of the winner. And we know, you understand, how that will basically end up. If you remember the movie Troy, do you understand? And you can actually see how Achilles basically destroyed that. This is the same one-on-one combat. Do you understand? That the Philistines, they chose their champion. Do you understand? Fighter. And I love what they call that champion fighter. They said Goliath was a champion. He was battle tested. Goliath can't be suffering from a pituitary problem, growth hormone. Goliath can't suffer from gigantism or acromegaly, because those people walk slow and they have eyesight problems. Goliath is battle tested. You don't become a champion fighter, do you understand, and having defects, because that is also, Benjamin, you understand, Ben, I mean, the Hebrew word they use there for perfect, the Hebrew word they use there for how Goliath was built in between. Goliath was perfect. There was no defect with Goliath. He's battle tested, champion fighter. Does that make sense? So don't come and tell me that Goliath. So the Philistines, they chose their guy. And so now, Israel has to choose his guy. And then we will see, you understand, who will fight. But if you zoom in, are you ready for this? Massive big question. Comment in the section if you want to. Who was Goliath looking to fight against? Who was Goliath taunting in the armies of God? Who does Goliath want? It is a one-on-one combat. Right? So they are going to fight one-on-one. Who is Goliath? Because he's a Nephilim. Who is he looking at? Who is he fighting at? It's interesting. Listen, and you will see. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel. This day I give a man. He says, give me a man that we may fight together. Give me a man that we may fight together. You won't believe who was Goliath looking for. Remember this guy. Remember this guy. Do you remember him? The captain of the armies of God. You won't believe that Goliath wanted to fight this guy. The captain, it was a spiritual battle. Goliath is looking for the captain of the armies of God. The captain of the armies of God. Because listen, what Miriam was saying when they went through the Red Sea. Miriam was saying, the Lord is that man. And the Lord is the man of war. The Lord is his name. Can you see that? The Adonites of war, who is the captain of the armies of God, he is a man of war. Goliath wanted to fight that guy. You understand? We need to fight the armies of God, because army Israel is just a nation of Israel. They are not the armies of God. The armies of God, that David says the battle belongs to God. That prophet says to Jehoshaphat and Judah, the battle is not yours, the battle is God. Like Moses would say at the Red Sea, you need to be quiet because God will fight. He is the one who fights in the armies of God. The one that Elijah says, you understand, that the people that was with us is more than this army. The one that fights the armies, the Adonites of the Lord of the host. He, the one who is, Goliath wanted to fight him. Can you see? Goliath wanted to fight the Lord, who is a man of war. And that is interesting, that Goliath wanted to fight him. And if we zoom in, now we come closer to the story at the battle of the valley of Elah. Now that we are very close to the story, it's interesting. You need to go and read 1 Samuel chapter 16, that Samuel came to anoint somebody, that there is a foreshadow, somebody that represents the Lord of the host, King David. And you're going to see who King David is, because you're going to find out that the Mashiach, you understand, right? The Mashiach, who is basically the one that is on the white horse, that leads the armies in the book of Revelation, that is the King of Kings, that King David is basically coming from that line, from that tribe, that King David comes from that tribe. Isn't that interesting? And now you're going to find who King David is, because Samuel, in 1 Samuel chapter 16, he was going to the town. Can you see? He was going to David's town. And as Samuel was coming in, interesting, as Samuel was coming, the people started to shudder. The entire Judah tribe, the Judah nation started to shudder. Samuel was a true prophet. So they asked Samuel, are you coming in peace? Because Samuel came to settle the dispute. Samuel came and they thought that they are going to be rebuked. Because wherever Samuel goes, you know, the wrath of God will go. You know, somebody is going to be chastised. Somebody is going to be disciplined. Somebody is going to be said, thus say the Lord. And they asked him, are you coming? Are you coming for peace? And he said, yes. The Lord told him, why you take a heifer and you tell them that you are basically come to offer. That's interesting in Deuteronomy 21. When somebody is basically been murdered, and the murdered person will run to the unknown town, and there they are going to make atonement for him by taking a heifer at the altar. And this is how Samuel came, you understand. And as Samuel came and built the altar, it's interesting that Jesse's sons are anointed at an altar. What? For those of you who've done my ancient portals, you know what an altar represents. That an altar is the Hamakom. Isn't that interesting? It's at the Hamakom where the Shekhinah will come from heaven. It's at the Hamakom where the prophets will prophesy when the Shekhinah is present. So, Samuel's sons were actually anointed at an altar. It's at an altar. And now, there is something, a pattern that you need to carefully listen. Listen to this pattern. Even Samuel got it missed. What? Samuel, that was a true prophet, he missed it. Because he went straight to Jesse's eldest son, Eliab. And he basically told himself, surely this is the Lord's anointed that is before me. Do you see that? Even Samuel made that mistake. And when you go and read at the story of Eliab, he was basically the firstborn of Jesse. The firstborn of Jesse. And now you know the firstborn right. That the firstborn has the right. So Eliab was actually destined to become the king. What? Because Eliab had a problem. What was Eliab's problem? Eliab's problem was Eliab's heart. Because that is what the Lord said. Because you will find out when the man took the horn. Can you see that? And when the man took the horn and he threw the oil unto Eliab, Can you see that? The moment he threw the oil onto Eliab, you understand, the oil didn't come out. What? The oil did not obey the law of gravity. And because what is a miracle? It is a supernatural intervention that supersedes the natural law. The natural law was gravity. But the oil didn't come out. That's a nice Talmudic story. That's a nice story in the Midrash. That the oil didn't come out when the oil was basically put on, what's this guy's name? On Eliab. Isn't that interesting? And then the Lord said to Samuel, now you look at the outer appearance of that man, but God looks at the heart. Can you see that? God look at the heart. Isn't that interesting? Jesse brought all his 7 sons. And all 7 sons that came, the oil did not obey the law of gravity. Isn't that interesting? And then they said these words. Are you ready for these words? Isn't there another son? And then Jesse said, okay, there is one. And they went and fetched David. Why did Jesse not think that David is his son? What? Why did Samuel came to settle the dispute? Why? That's an interesting thing. I'm going to stop right here because I want to go in depth when I'm telling you that story when David was anointed. You understand? And I will make it my part 3 of my David and Goliath. Thank you for listening. God bless you and God bless you.